I'm actually going to separate that out. There we go. All right, yeah, that's how I want it. All right, Goober Morning. How are you doing today? We are just giving just a moment for everybody to kind of get ready for the stuff we're doing today. For anybody who doesn't know, I am starting this year a yearly events recap. So what I'm doing is I've gone through and I've searched through the major events that have happened in the previous year. I have written them down and put a few sources with some things that I thought needed some sources, and we're just going to review them, because the big problem that I see that a lot of people have is a lot of people forget things. They forget all the time the major events that shape the rest of our world and the way that we think. I kind of want to put a stop to that, and not only that, but I want to have a record of things that happened. One of the things that really has inspired me and has kind of encouraged me to even start this in the first place was Glenn Beck has a pretty extensive museum collection for his own, his own personal self. And I find it really impressive because of this one thing that I didn't know about until he showed this leaflet. He showed a leaflet from World War II before the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were given warning that it was going to happen. And it's one of those things, we hear about, the horrors of how we dropped nuclear bombs on a completely innocent place, but then he's got this piece of history in his own personal museum of actual leaflets that were dropped giving warning of what was about to happen. That for me is just, it's incredible. How insane it is that we can forget something so important, and because we forget that, a different narrative comes up. And when that different narrative comes up, it shapes the way that we think and the way that we act. I want this series to be a relic that you guys can look back on and remember what happened. I want it to be one of those things that, let's say that somebody says something from 2022 and you think back, well, I remember hearing about that in the news, but that's not quite how I remembered it back in the time. That's what this is for. This is to create as much of a first-hand-ish type of account as somebody who's lived through 2022 and who will live through 2023 and so on and so forth. This is to create a yearly remembrance of the things that have happened so that we don't forget them and we're not led astray when someone tries to provide false information about a specific event or year. With that explanation, here's how this is going to work, okay? The beginning part is not meant to be a commentary piece. The beginning part is just to go through events. And then if any of you guys join in, I know it's early and it's still around holiday season. It's just the 3rd. But if any of you want to come in and ask questions, or we'll save the second half for the commentary part at the end. But the first part, for those of you who just want to remember the news, this first part is for you. We're just going to breeze through it fairly quickly. We're just going to go over some of the major details. And, I actually, while I'm thinking about it, I need to put all of my sources. So this is everything that we're going to cover here. Some of it is very specific instances, but then down near the end, we have just a couple of very general things to remember. So let me put these sources, because I did say I was going to put the sources in here. There we go. All right, and this everything now is going to be in the description. So if you want to do this research for yourself, or if you're not sure about something I said, or you want to see if, you want to check on the reliability of one of my sources, they're in the description, okay? And as often as I could, I wanted to use something that most people would agree with, or at least people that I disagree with. would feel more comfortable with. All right, so let's move back over here and back over here. Time to start going through. We're going to start up here at the top and then work our way slowly down. If I don't have an exact date for something, I just have a general time frame. So first up over here, we have the Canadian truckers protest. If you guys remember, earlier last year, about this time, Canadian truckers were starting to protest a lot of the mask and vaccine mandates that were being done. And so then they would park their way in the cities and honk horns all night long and whatnot. So here's the article I have from the New York Times. So, truckers protest in Canada, what you need to know. That's the name of the article from the New York Times. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has taken the rare step of declaring a national public order emergency to end what has become an anti-government protest. All right? So here's the article. For weeks, Canadian protesters fighting vaccine requirements have paralyzed Ottawa and key border crossings, inspired demonstrations around the globe, and injected political instability into the stunned top of Canadian government. All right, so it goes through all of this. You'll see some stuff over here, like, for example, on Saturday, police in Ottawa cleared the thoroughfare in front of the Parliament building, arresting 170 people and removing 46 vehicles. Quote from Justin Trudeau, "It's high time that these illegal and dangerous activities stop." Justin Trudeau said earlier in the week, the protests, which at first seemed small and disorganized, led him to declare Canada's first national public order emergency in half a century. So this is a big deal in Canada. And we've got more about Canada coming in the future. Weeks of protests become one of the most visible and contagious eruptions of anti-vaccine anger around the world. Let's be clear. Now, let's be clear. This is where framing comes in, and this will get into my commentary stuff later. But this isn't about the vaccines. This is about vaccine mandates. That's the issue. All right? But notice the framing. While truckers initiated the protests on January 22nd, only a few of them are among a group of self-proclaimed leaders involved in organizing. Far-right activists and separatists from Western Canada have also seized on the issue of anti-government grievances, and as former officers and military veterans who may believe have used their expertise to help organize the occupation. So far, this really isn't too much of a big deal. There doesn't seem to be anything that's actually violent going on here, okay? And you... The reason I say you know that is because you know that if it would have happened, we would hear about it. All right, and so then you see this big thing of how these protests have evolved. Reached Ottawa on the 28th and threatened to disrupt the economy and make life miserable for residents until the federal officials rolled back the pandemic restrictions. They're ambitious in issuing blanket demands for lifting all of the economies. Does this article mention... I'm trying to see if this article mentions, because it's been a while since I put this in here. But there's another article that you can search where Justin Trudeau actually seized the bank accounts of these truckers to try to stop them. So look at that face. I don't even want to... Ugh, gross. But you can read this one for yourself. There's more of this to come. And at this point, with news about the vaccine, which we'll get to in a little bit, and other things going on, keep this in mind. Keep in mind what happened earlier this year, that the outcry was about vaccine mandates, not about the vaccine in general, about vaccine mandates. And the protest was about the vaccine being mandatory in order to keep your job. Next major event. Let me make sure we're still up and running good. Yep, we're still up and running good. All right, so next major event. Truth Social launches on February 21st of 2022. If you guys remember, Donald Trump was blocked out from Twitter permanently at first. And from a lot of social media. He was pretty much like blanket taken down. And it was one of the first times, if not the first time, that something that drastically had happened to a sitting president or world leader like that. And why that's important is because that becomes, as we'll see in a little bit, an important part of how social media evolved over the years and the way that people are now pressuring social media companies to take people down. But the important reason for Truth Social is because this was the first time that Donald Trump had the ability again to be able to speak to a wide audience, which is why when you hear these news stories come out about Donald Trump, something he said or something he did, it's from something that he posted on Truth Social. This is how he's getting around and talking to people. Next, we have, and some of these are going to be a little jumbled, and I'm sorry that it's a little jumbled. But we have the $40 billion being sent to Ukraine May 21st. And it's important to note, and I think you guys have seen the stories, it was not the first, or it was not the last of the $40 billion. There was more money that has been issued, and I'm not sure what that big cryptocurrency thing is. There's other people who have done a much better job of working through that than I have. I wasn't able to understand my way through it, but cryptocurrency stuff is confusing for me anyways. But the dude's arrested, if I remember correctly. On May 24th, we had the Uvalde shooting. There's a lot of people who've done stuff on the Uvalde shooting. A mess all the way around. On June 1st, we had the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, which takes us over to Vox. With, surprisingly from Vox, a very appropriate title for their article. The Me Too backlash is here. Johnny Depp's legal victory and the death of Roe v. Wade are a part of the same toxic cultural movement. Oh my goodness. Vox doesn't like a dude winning a defamation lawsuit? Wow. All right, so just kind of going through this a little bit. After 5 years of anticipation, it's now clear the long-awaited and much-dreaded backlash to the Me Too movement is here. On May 2nd, a draft leak of the Supreme Court opinion that would strike down Roe v. Wade, and with it, the American women's rights to reproductive freedom. Good Lord. Commentary later. Johnny Depp won his defamation suit against Amber Heard, who allegedly... By the way, notice this article. It is framed about Johnny Depp, but it's not really about Johnny Depp. It's really about the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Very interesting how they do that. All right, it's only fitting that the cultural movement that began with women speaking out against powerful men who they say hurt them announced its end by the courts finding in favor of one of those men. Now, here's the important thing, okay? The big name that the Me Too movement first went after was Bill Cosby, okay? You guys remember that? Bill Cosby, who's, by the way, getting out of prison. Bill Cosby was one of the first big voices. You had Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein, both of whom had multiple women come against him. And the issue is... the issue is not with the Me Too movement attacking those people, because, especially with Bill Cosby, you have him under oath admitting that he would lure these women in and drug them so that he could have sex with them. He admitted that, okay? He is exactly the disgusting person that the lawsuit claims that he is, even if there ended up being issues with the testimony of one of the defendants, not the defendants, with one of the women's stories. He still admitted it under oath. Okay? So that's the good parts of Me Too, when people who actually do bad things are put behind bars. But in this story with Johnny Depp was a different story, and I still count this as news because this is more of the opinion piece here. So here, Depp's victory does not come from a criminal trial. It was a civil case about a newspaper op-ed. In the Washington Post in 2018, Heard wrote an op-ed titled, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change." There, Heard mentions a Depp, but she refers to herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. Depp argued that Heard was clearly referring to him, and as such was defaming him, and the jury agreed. Because another part of the story which you guys can dig deeper on, Johnny Depp lost a lot of movie deals because of this, okay? Johnny Depp was one of the biggest movie stars of the time, and all of a sudden people started dropping him because of this op-ed. That's the reason for the case. And when the jury looked at it, as you can see here, the jury found that she did defame him, and that these actions, because this is not the first trial, this is not the first time that they had a trial happen, and Johnny Depp was found innocent of abusing Amber Heard. So all of this, you can read this up yourself, but all of this is basically a hit piece against pro-life people using Johnny Depp's victory over Amber Heard as the pedestal to launch its attack. Okay? So you can read that yourself. That's a big cultural event showing that women can't lie about what happened to them. And we found, you can look at the trial yourself and the way it broke down, but her story had a lot of holes. He never what's the word I'm looking for? He never testified under oath that he committed any of the things that were done against her. That she says were done against her. So it's a different story from the Bill Cosby. If it was a Bill Cosby thing where he comes in and says, yes, I sexually abused her, that's a different story. In that case, yeah, lock him up. Okay? In that case, yeah, big old crybaby. Somebody found out about what you did. But in this case, two juries found, no, didn't happen. He didn't do those things, so you saying that he did is defamation. All right, so that's why this story is important, and I'm going to leave this up in case we end up talking about it later. All right, next. The January 6th hearings, specifically Cassidy Hutchinson testifying about the Secret Service, and this happened on June 29th. So I looked for this article that I found a while ago, but I wanted to find something else that was a little bit more left-wing friendly, because you've got a bunch of Democrats and Liz Cheney. You got a bunch of Democrats who are on this January 6th committee, and sorry for the commentary. But the big problem here is this lady, Cassidy Hutchinson. If you haven't heard, this is the lady that testified in court that Donald Trump, during the January 6th events, got in the limo and commanded his limo driver to drive to the Capitol building so he could lead the people who were there into taking over the Capitol, okay? And when the driver refused and the Secret Service members refused, he reached forward across the seats to grab the steering wheel and to try to drive it himself. Okay, you remember that story? You've heard that story? Okay, here's the thing. Not a single Secret Service member verified this story. She was not there. She admitted she was not there. She said that she heard this story from someone else. That somebody else did not verify her story. And as a matter of fact, as you can read in this article and many other articles, the Secret Service have said that they would be happy to come onto the committee and to give their account about how this did not take place. As a matter of fact, I forget, who is it that... let me find real quick while I'm here. Because there's one individual... Yes, continue reading. I should add. So the future ones will be much more put together than this. All right, so we have this this person, Ornado, previously said that he doesn't remember this discussion that happened between Cassidy Hutchinson and himself. And Thompson didn't reveal whether the second round of questioning before the committee jogged Ornado's memory. But that seems like a pretty important event that you would remember, right? But not only that, Ornado, person who relayed the story to Hutchinson about the incident, And this Secret Service agent, Bobby Engel, the agent driving the car, those are the only people who were in the car, okay? None of these people were willing to back up Cassidy Hutchinson's story. But Cassidy Hutchinson's story is the one that's driving the January 6th hearings. She's still considered a reliable source, even though none of the three of these people are willing to back up her story, okay? That's why this is an important event, because you're starting to see this is not about the truth. This is about what's the word? This is about an agenda. This is the agenda of the January 6th committee to use someone, even if that person is not telling the truth, in order to get somebody they dislike behind bars. Because if it was about the truth, they would have thrown out Cassidy Hutchinson's story for not even being there. As a matter of fact, Hutchinson testified, saying that the deputy of staff right here, Tony Ornado, told her of an incident in the car. The problem is, Tony Ornado wasn't even in the car. The only people in the car right here, there were only two other people in the car other than Trump: Secret Service agent Bobby Engel and the agent driving the car. Ornado wasn't even there himself, which means this is a third-hand account. Very weak evidence. And what would you have happen if somebody like Cassidy Hutchinson were to bring something like this? Would you bring Cassidy Hutchinson? No. In a real court proceeding, you would go to Bobby Engel, who was there, or this Secret Service agent who's driving the car. You would go to one of them, but they didn't. They went to Cassidy Hutchinson, and neither of these two people have verified her story. That should tell you everything you need to know about the January 6th committee. Man, it is hard to not do commentary. All right, so moving on to the next one, we have June 21st, or no, June 29th, same day. My apologies. Jordan Peterson was banned from Twitter. If you remember, Jordan Peterson was banned from Twitter permanently because of his statements about... what's her name? Elliot Page is what Ellen Page's name has been changed to. And his statements were about how this doctor was basically how this doctor was a hack job and should lose his license or something along those lines, and that was the reason to ban him. Okay? In reality, that's a very, very mild statement, but that was enough for him to be banned from Twitter. Okay? Now, that will be important later on, and I didn't put this here as well, but you also have Andrew Tate being completely banned from everything. I'm pretty sure... Oh, I do have it. It's a little out of order, but I'll get to that in a little while. All right, so later on, we have this article from the New York Post about inflation. There was a claim, if you remember, earlier in the year, that, so many stupid ads, that there was actually no recession. Okay? Recession, another victim of Democrats' rewriting of the English language by Dan McLaughlin. Okay? So, here's the thing. A recession has had a pretty straightforward definition for ages. For ages, it has been right here. Economists have a technical definition for recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Okay, that's technically what a recession is and has been for a long time. And look at this. In 2008, Joe Biden's National Economic Council Director, Brian Deese. Okay? Keep that in mind. 2008, when Joe Biden was vice president, or about to be vice president, Brian Deese wrote this. Okay? He said economists have a technical definition of recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But Here's what these on that Wednesday said: 2 negative quarters of GDP growth is not the technical definition of a recession. So wait a second, which one is it now? Seems like there's an issue here. You can read the rest of the article yourself. It's pretty that's really where the news is on this big difference between what he said back in 2008 and what he's saying now, okay? That's the news of the story. The rest is him being pretty negative about it. But a lot of the Biden team and a lot of people in the news were trying to say for a while that this was not a recession because it was not the technical definition of a recession, when back in 2008, that's exactly what they were saying when it was George Bush in office. All right? So that's the big thing to remember there, okay? There was a change in the definition of a recession in order to save Biden's butt, okay? So we got that. What's the next thing we got over here? We have August 8th, we have FBI raiding Mara Lago. And here we go back to the New York Post. I like the New York Post. They my friend. Now, the New York Post, I will admit, is just as left-wing as pretty much every other page anywhere. But they also have plenty of right-wing writers as well. They do a good job of having people from multiple belief systems write for them, which is why I trust them more than most of the others. They're not just one-way vision all the time. So you can read this for yourself. So the FBI raid on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, broke into a safe in his home. Former president said on Monday, FBI agents were reportedly searching for classified documents that Trump allegedly brought with him from the White House to Mar-a-Lago after his presidency ended, which, if true, could be a violation of federal law. But there's an issue. Still haven't found anything yet. As a matter of fact, if you've heard, there was this idea that he took the nuclear codes with him. That was the big story that was originally going on. And here we see the raid comes as the Justice Department is examining the actions of Trump in its criminal investigation of efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. This probe is separate from the department's investigation into his handling of classified materials, but it is interesting they do notice that. Raid comes as the Justice Department is examining the actions of Trump in its investigation of overturning the 2020 presidential election. They point out it is happening the same time as is happening, and we just looked at the Cassidy Hutchinson story and how that's been going. If they can't nail him in one area, they're going to try to nail him in another area. Okay. Now, I'm not a diehard Trump fan. I'm not. But I can tell when there's a rotten fish in the room, and it seems like there's a big rotten fish in the room right now. Not to mention that we know that all, at least most, if not all, U.S. presidents have brought classified materials with them. That's part of what they're allowed to do, is to declassify stuff. Able to hold on to some souvenirs here and there. But you can read through a lot of this. And there's more people who've written better stuff about this. And this is an older article. I wanted to bring an older article because I wanted to get as close to the news as I could, and to try to weed through a little bit of the issues and the commentary. I wanted to get as close to the actual news as possible. So we had the raid on Mar-a-Lago, based on this idea of him having nuclear codes. We are what, 6 months removed, and there's still no nuclear codes discovered. Don't you think that would have turned up if they said, yo, Trump brought nuclear codes? All right, next. We have the death of Elizabeth II on September 8th. Very sad, tragic thing. And the reason that I think it's important, it's different than some people's. I know for people of Great Britain, it's very different because this is their big idolized figure. This is their This is the head of their state, basically, not the head of their state, but this is their big centralized figure that they build their identity around, who passed away. And I get that that's sad and whatnot, but the reason that I find it sad is we've lost one of the last people who was alive during World War II. And we may, I'm not positive on this, but we may have lost the last active world leader during World War II, which is a big deal because we have a lot of people who compare each other to Nazis, this, that, and the other, and sometimes I can say, the actions are similar. I don't think the heart's the same, but the actions may be similar. And I think, the actions are not similar, but dang, the way you're talking sure sounds like it. But the reason I find it so sad is because you have people like Elizabeth II who actually knew Nazis, who actually led the people against Nazis. That person's dead. Which means we're not too far away from being completely removed from World War II. And I think that's a really sad thing, because if this is such a huge cultural event, world event of the century, we don't really have anybody who can give firsthand accounts anymore. So that's why I really find that to be so sad, and I fear for what will happen in the future because of it. All right, so June 24th, stepping back in time. Like I said, some of these are out of order. We have the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is one of the biggest events in history. And as a reminder, this is not outlawing abortion. This is just saying it goes back to the states, okay? Now, some states are doing good things. Some states are doing bad things. Tennessee right now has kind of done a little bit of an overstep in restricting treatments for ectopic pregnancies. That's one of the things that our OBGYN, because you guys know we having a baby, one of the things that she was saying is like, we're dealing with in an ectopic pregnancy, we're dealing with something that the baby's going to be gone, if not already. There's no way in current medical ability to save a baby in an ectopic pregnancy. And letting it linger is going to bring death to the mother. I mean, the babies, it's like if you think about it, it's like you got two people on the battlefield, okay? One of them's shot in the leg. One of them's got 15 holes in his chest. Which one are you going to try to save if you only got time to save one? That's kind of what we're looking at here is, sadly, in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, babies like the man who's bleeding out, 15 holes in him, and there would have to be an act of God in order to save him. And we're just not at the we're not at the medical point to be able to save the baby. And so some of the restrictions that are made on some of the treatments and ways to take care of the mother are really restricted in Tennessee. And I know who is it? I forget. I think it was Kentucky. Did something similar, and they went too far with a bill, and then they had to really backtrack. I hope that happens, and that happens soon, because it is okay to be pro-life, but you also have to be reasonable within the science, okay? So that's the big deal over in back in June. Moving back forward, we've got the hurricane hitting Florida, Hurricane Ian on September 28th. It was one of the biggest hurricanes in a hot minute, but we also had some pretty fast response times, and there's a hilarious video of this guy down in Arcadia, Florida, who was saying that he doesn't know about everybody else, but the gas is here in Arcadia, and so he's changing his vote from Democrat to DeSantis, and it was yeah. So that was another big major event. We're sorry for the people in Florida. But thankfully, it seems like their response team has gotten their crap together more than they have in the past. Also, throughout September and continuing on further, immigrants were sent to New York City and Martha's Vineyard. And for this, we're going to go, and I know some people are going to scream at me, we're going to go to Louder with Crowder. And the reason that we're going to Louder with Crowder is because there is so much crap to swim through when it comes to all this stuff. You can watch this full video. The Louder with Crowder team does a really good job of doing these deep dives and digging up information that most people aren't able to find, usually that I'm not able to find. But then when they reveal it and they put it into the shows and the show maps and they give you the links to their sources, I go and check, and sure enough, they're there. So that's why I tend to trust it. So you can watch this video. There's a lot of lies that were spread about DeSantis sending them like they were being human trafficked and they had no idea what was going on. That's not true, and he goes through very well a lot of the lies and stuff. Moving forward, we have Andrew Tate being canceled. I forget what date that happened, but let's flip over here to Forbes, the downfall of Andrew Tate and its implications, okay? So, we've got Andrew Tate, social media sensation for some time, has been banned from YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. And I believe he was also banned from Twitter. Bans were put in place because of a campaign that touted Tate as being damaging to his primarily young audience. Tate also closed his Hustlers University affiliate marketing program immediately after the bans took place. All right, so here are the big questions, okay? When it comes to Andrew Tate, because I've heard a lot of things and I've seen a lot of things like him being arrested, the human trafficking stuff over in Romania. I've seen all of that, and it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I had no idea who he was until he was banned. And I think that was true for a lot of people. I think that some of his online stuff was a little overblown. All right, so we have a bunch of quotes here like misogyny is a hateful ideology that is not tolerated on TikTok. The TikTok spokesperson said, our investigation into this content is ongoing as we continue to remove violative accounts and videos and pursue measures to strengthen our enforcement, including our detection models against this type of content. The problem is I haven't seen a lot of super negative content. I haven't seen a lot of super negative things that he said. There's some things he says that are great, some things he says that are pretty bad, but nothing that counts on like the illegal or the bannable offenses. And now people will take that and they will point to his arrest in Romania and say, see, he's arrested, so he should stay banned. But wait a second. Being arrested doesn't constitute enough to be banned on social media. It doesn't. I'm sorry, there's nowhere in the rules that says that being arrested is enough to be banned. I'm trying to stay out of commentary here, but, and I will come back to this because I think this is important, but he was unilaterally banned from all of these different places, and this was before he was arrested for human trafficking and stuff in Romania, and I don't know really the details of that. It's not really as important to me as some people would wish. All right, so then we've got over here on October 10th, Pfizer admits that the vaccine was not tested for transmission. And here I'm using a very different article because you give the internet long enough and the propaganda pieces will start to roll out. Okay? So the reason that I bring up this one is because of this question. If vaccines couldn't stop COVID transmission, then why were they almost made mandatory? Okay, you remember that the big push was that you get vaccinated so that you can protect other people, right? Or you put on a mask so that you can protect other people. Even if you don't care for yourself, at least do it for someone else. At least keep someone else safe. The problem is we got pushed a lie. And there are plenty of what's that word? Compilation videos of world leaders and doctors and whatnot saying that the vaccine is useful for stopping transmission. When, on October 12th, Dutch member of European Parliament, Rob Roos, tweeted a clip showing Pfizer president of international markets, Janine Small, admitting with a chuckle that regarding the question around whether we knew about stopping immunization before it entered the market, no. Now, here's the thing. As one of the people who is vaccine skeptical, that would have been okay. That would have been okay for us. It would have been okay if you said, we're not sure if this works. And that's a lot of what it originally was kind of happening. It was at the beginning, we were saying, we're not sure if this is going to work, but it's an option available if you want it. The problem is so many places made it mandatory before we knew about stopping immunization. Before we knew about that, it was being made mandatory. And that's the big question to ask. If vaccines couldn't stop COVID transmission, then why were they almost made mandatory? And here's another big question. Pfizer, if you guys did not know if it would stop immunization, I wonder if that's a incorrect word, but if it stopped transmission. Yeah, COVID transmission. If it stopped transmission, if you knew that it didn't stop, or if you didn't have information that it stopped transmission before it entered the market, why didn't you speak up when people were trying to make it mandatory? These are big questions that need to be asked, because these are people that ended up controlling our lives for the past 2 years? The past 2 years we have had these medical professionals, and nobody's elected to these super powerful positions, and all of these politicians who are making these big deals and these big sweeping go back to the Canadian truckers. Okay? Back to the Canadian truckers over here. If it wasn't tested for transmission, why are we pushing it as if it has been? That's the big question, and that's why people like the Canadian truckers, that's why that's such an important story. All right? So we had that on October 10th. Now, generally in October, because I don't remember exactly when it happened, but we have... Ooh, don't want to see your face. So, Biden administration asked Saudi Arabia to postpone OPEC decision by a month. Okay? So, what was going to happen was there was going to have to be major cutbacks and price hikes on oil from Saudi Arabia and from OPEC. Okay? Turns out that when Biden heard about it, he asked them to postpone it until after the election. Interesting, isn't it? So here's the key points, and you can read the article yourself. Biden administration asked Saudi Arabia, the de facto leader of oil producer group OPEC, to delay its decision on oil output by a month, the kingdom said in a statement. Notably, Biden's request would have delayed the decision until after the U.S. midterm elections. That's CNBC saying that, okay? That's a big deal. If CNBC is pointing that out, then you know it's a big deal. In a statement, the Saudi government defended its output cut and said all OPEC decisions are based on economic forecasts and needs. You also remember how the Biden administration has been using a lot of oil in our oil reserves? And you notice now how prices are starting to go back up. Not too long ago, we were filling up gas for, what was it, $2.30, which was at least what it was during the Obama days. And now it's creeping back up to the $3 mark. Did you know? Have you noticed how everything seemed to be making things as good as possible until the midterms were over, and then it's okay if the prices go back up afterwards? Seems like there's an issue with that, right? Yeah, there is, and you should be concerned about that. All right, so here's one that I'm lumping together. Two major Democrats left the Democrat Party to become independents. We had Tulsi Gabbard and Krysten Sinema. Tulsi Gabbard officially left on October 11th, and Krysten Sinema left on December 9th. Now, the reason I give air quotes for Tulsi Gabbard is because Tulsi Gabbard already mentioned this like a year ago. When she was on the Louder with Crowder program, she mentioned that the Democrat Party has left her and that she's not at home among them, and she's starting to put her support behind Republicans. This has been something that's happening for a while, but the reason why it's a big deal now is because she put out a video and started campaigning with Republicans, and she particularly was really pushing for Kari Lake in Arizona, which we'll get to that in a minute. All right, so October 12th, we are going over to Alex Jones And I wanted to bring this article because I could give you one that's just news, but the truth is, with Alex Jones stuff, it is really hard to find news without the propaganda one way or another. With Alex Jones, most people are either dead set against him or dead set for him now, and it's really hard to find someone who's going to be more honest about it. So I found this as the closest thing I could find that would provide both the news and the reason that it is news. All right, so Alex Jones loses his lawsuit and must pay Sandy Hook families almost $1 billion. It was like 900 something million. The nearly $1 billion judgment against Alex Jones for spreading false conspiracy theories about the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre brought long-sought relief to family members in hopes that the eye-popping figure would deter others from broadcasting falsehoods. But Jones said that he's given no signs of tempering his bluster. A headline on his website Thursday blared that the show trial verdict signals the death of free speech. His lawyer said it's not certain that relatives who lost loved ones in the mass shooting will see the full dollar amount after promised appeals and bankruptcy proceedings play out. The thing is like he's already paid so much money. This has not been the first time that this has happened, and it doesn't look like it's going to be the last. So not only are they going to try to collect the $965 million awarded to a jury in Connecticut on Wednesday, and not only is there the separate $49 million judgment from a Texas jury in August. The issue is it's not going to stop there. The issue is it's going to go a lot further than that. Look here. William Sherlock, whose wife Mary Sherlock was killed at Sandy Hook, told reporters about the judgment that people like Alex Jones will have to rethink what they say. The reason why this is so important is because they're showing, there was a statement by the lawyers that they're going to use this as a template on how they're going to go after other people in the future. So look here. The judge in Connecticut will soon decide the amount of punitive damages, which will be added to the $965 million. After that, Jones can formally appeal. More money to be added to the $1 billion that he doesn't have. Now, let's be honest, people. Do you really think that Alex Jones has $1 billion? Do you really think he does? After being banned in so many places, and after being shut out by a lot of the media, do you really think that he actually has $1 billion worth of stuff? Whatever asset he has, Tate says, these families are going to chase him to the ground and enforce every cent of this verdict against him. This is bigger than just the one trial. Now, regardless of what you think about Alex Jones, because Alex Jones even said that he was wrong. I've seen the man admit multiple times. You know, there was supposed to be like this big event during the trial about how he finally admitted that what he said about the Sandy Hook shooting was false. Not only have I heard him in the past 3 years apologize at least 3 times just on one show, not just apologize, but tell the truth about it on at least 3 times on one other person's channel, including on his own. But he had evidence that he reversed what he was saying back in the same year. The problem is it's not about justice anymore. It's about driving people like Alex Jones into the ground. So you can read that article and you can see why this is not going to end with just the awarding of this case. All right, so October 27th, Elon Musk buys Twitter and restores excuse me. It restores many of the banned accounts. I'm a little dry because I just got finished streaming the first Halo game for a little bit. There we go. Elon Musk buys Twitter, restores a lot of banned accounts. Doesn't do it across the board, but he restores people like Jordan Peterson. And we'll get to more of that in a little bit because the Twitter files are a big deal. Which actually does lead us here to the DHS docs, which were leaked, revealing censorship deal with Facebook and Twitter. And as we see now in a lot of the other Twitter files, excuse me, there are others. All right, so the Department of Homeland Security is quietly broadening its efforts to curb speech as it considers dangerous, an investigation by The Intercept has found. Years of internal DHS memos, emails, and documents obtained via leaks and ongoing lawsuit, as well as public documents, illustrate an expansive effort by the agency to influence tech platforms. So what has happened, if you've not been keeping up with what's been happening with Twitter, Elon Musk has been releasing a lot of like hidden information that's been tucked away for a long time. And it's really starting to show like these, it's really starting to show how the government has been active in these social media companies. So, for example, here's the key takeaways for this article. Though DHS shuttered its controversial Disinformation Governance Board, a strategic document reveals the underlying work is ongoing. DHS plans to target inaccurate information on the origins of COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of the U.S. support to Ukraine. That's a big deal because those right there, every one of those things listed are major cultural things in the United States that the Department of Homeland Security is censoring on these platforms. There are emails sent back and forth, and you can go search pretty much anybody else who's doing a big deep dive on this. They can give you a lot more information than I'm able to. I'm just covering the main events so that we have a record of them. All right, so that's really the big deal, and that's honestly, if I were to pin one most important event, I would say that the release of the Twitter files is the most important event of 2022 for that very reason. All right, so then we get around to midterms, and we see again in Arizona, the Maricopa County machines are faulty again. Which brings us back over to our friends, the New York Post. Voting counting machine snafu hits Maricopa County, Arizona on election day. So what happened is a lot of the votes were not able to be read. There was a lack in chain of custody, and as we speak right now, there is a lawsuit going on. Carrie Lake is pursuing a reversal of the election, saying that the election has been stolen from her. Now, I don't know if it's true. I don't know. I'm letting it play out in the courts, and I'm watching closely. I cannot say anything one way or another, but I will say this. The exact same things that happened in 2020 happened again in 2022, okay? And what they were able to show is there was a lack in the chain of custody. These machines in this very Republican-heavy county were either faulty or were short on toner or had the wrong size ballots printed out that made them misread over and over. All of these little things that you would think would be in place by the time something as big as a midterm rolls around, and yet they came across the same issues that they had in 2020, which should point towards there being a big overhaul of the Arizona system, but we'll see what happens in Arizona. But either way, I think that what's happening with Arizona is going to drive other red states towards being more strict and more secure in their state elections. So we'll see what the outcome is there. And oh look, it's our friends from Canada. Canada extends gun bans. That should be... There we go. Extends its gun bans and freezes to include many hunting rifles, which brings us to here. Canada's semi-automatic firearm ban would include many common hunting rifles and shotguns. So, not too long ago, Justin Trudeau put a freeze on handguns, okay? He put a freeze on handgun sales, said no more handguns can be used, and it looks like he's stepping closer and closer to Australia's model, where there's a big gun buyback program. He's not there yet, but it looks like he's moving that direction. So here's the deal. Pointing to the last-minute amendment that was made to Bill C-21 in late November, these groups say the proposed changes, not enacted yet, but proposed changes, would negatively affect sportsmen and other law-abiding gun owners while doing little to address the overreaching issue of gun violence in Canada. And that's a big problem with a lot of the gun stuff, and I'll get into that. Maybe I'll get into that in a minute. All right. So the National Firearms Association has joined several other groups and conservative members of parliament in protesting the newest version of the bill, which they say is an attack on hunting rights in Canada. Hunting celebrity Jim Shockey has called attention to it, along with Canadian goalie Carey Price, who posted a picture of himself on Instagram with an autoloader shotgun and spoke to the right to keep his hunting tools. Okay. So you've got all this going on. When it was first introduced in May, Bill C-21 was touted as a public safety bill. The original version allowed for the creation of red flag and yellow flag laws, created a new offense for altering magazine capabilities, and sought to increase penalties for firearm-related crimes. In a larger sense, however, it supported the Trudeau administration's ongoing effort to prevent civilians from owning certain types of guns, which took root in 2020 with the federal government's immediate ban of roughly 1,500 different weapons that were classified as assault-style firearms. So this is where the progression starts to happen, and this is why I don't buy into this dumb slippery slope fallacy thing. Is because people try to say, "Oh, you're saying a slippery slope fallacy is just this one thing leads to another thing." That's just not true. It doesn't happen that way. Well, what about when it does happen? Because it's happening right now in Canada. We said that if you start to go after, the big scary guns, that eventually you're going to get down towards taking all guns, as we saw happened in Australia. And as we saw as happen in Australia, you can look this up for yourself, the violent crime rate didn't take a downward dip in Australia for another 7 years. That's a big deal. You would think that if guns were to be causing the violence, if people having access to guns causes the violence, that we would see a dip immediately during the gun buyback, but it didn't. It took another 7 years in order for it to happen. And on top of that, in the grander scale, the violent crime in Australia was already going down. You could argue that there was probably something else that led to that. But there you go. And moving on to the last two things that have links. We have Ye or Kanye, Ye, whatever, permanently suspended from Twitter after an Alex Jones interview. And I've pulled up the video that I wanted to show you guys. This is Tim Pool, whom I really respect. He used to be over on the left. He used to be, if you know, what was it? Vice, if you know Vice News, which is a very, very Democrat-friendly site. This guy is one of the co-founders of it. And gradually over time, I've watched him shift further and further to the right as he says, wait a second, this isn't true. Wait a second, this isn't true. This isn't true. This isn't true. And he's gradually become more right-leaning. So I bring this up because Tim Pool usually does a really good job of breaking things down when it's more about more like a what's the word I'm looking for? An opinion difference. If there's something with an opinion difference, it's not necessarily news. I think Tim Pool does a good job of breaking down what the actual news is. Now, like everybody else, he's got his own biases, but I think he does a pretty good job in this video explaining the whole breakdown thing with Kanye on Alex Jones' show. And also, you want to talk about Alex Jones and paint him as an evil person, watch this video and count how many times he tries to tries to paint Kanye in the most positive light, saying that, well, you don't really mean that you support Hitler. You just mean that he was effective, or that he was able to maintain control over the people, but he's not actually a good person. Watch how many times Alex Jones tries to break Kanye away from praising Hitler. All right, and the last thing. The Brittany Griner swapped for Victor Boot over in December 8th. All right, so if you didn't know, we've got Brittany Griner, who was a basketball player, was imprisoned in Russia, and this dude, Victor Boot, has got a nickname, the Merchant of Death. Okay, so excuse me. So here, Brittany Griner's freedom ultimately hinged on the release of a convicted Russian arms dealer whose life story inspired a Hollywood film. U.S. basketball player was released on Thursday from a Russian detention center in a prisoner swap for Victor Boot, nicknamed the Merchant of Death by his accusers. All right, so who is it that we're trading here, and why is it that that Griner was over in one second. There we go. Nobody needs that. All right. Griner, who had for years played in the offseason for a Russian women's basketball team, was arrested on drug smuggling charges at an airport in Moscow region in February. Despite her testimony that she had inadvertently packed the cannabis oil found in her luggage, she was sentenced to 9 years in prison in early August and was moved to a penal colony in Mordovia in mid-November after losing her appeal. Now, here's the big deal, okay? Here's why this is such a big deal. Because you have Biden's press secretary, Jan-Feb person, however you pronounce her name. The way that she explains it is that the deal was either we give them Victor Boot to get her back, or we don't get anybody back at all. Okay, that was the big deal that was going on there. The problem is, why didn't we get her back for free? I mean, I just read to you the reason that she was put in the Russian prison. Nope, she's still there. The reason that she was put in prison was because of a super minor offense. Which, at the worst here in the States, in some places, nobody bats an eye. Yeah, a little cannabis container? No, that's no big deal. But even then, at the very worst, it would be considered a misdemeanor. Not a drug smuggling charge. This is such a minor offense, there's no reason that she should be in prison. Okay? But if there's no reason she should be in prison, why do we have to give a gun lord in order to get her back? We should have gotten her back for free, which is the big reason that I'm so upset with this whole trade deal. It's not that I don't think we should have had her back. I'm glad she's back. She should be back. We should have got her back for free. That's just the simple bottom line. And then 3 more things to remember. We've got the diesel shortage, the baby formula shortage, and, of course, the endless amount of videos of the family-friendly drag shows. All of these things are important for us to remember in 2023 as we look back on 2022, because all of these things are going to make a big difference throughout the rest of the decade. All right, so I don't believe anybody's currently live at the moment. I know I'm streaming in the morning, but I want to take some time to go over my thoughts about a few of these things. Sorry, guys. So one of the big things is, like, we see Canada is becoming more authoritarian as time goes on, and I'm really concerned about what's going to happen with Canada. I'm fearful that before long, Canada is going to be a miniature China. And that really concerns me because a lot of Americans look to China as, not to China, to Canada as being like what the United States should look like. That scares me a lot because y'all realize that they send a lot of their patients over here because their medical system's so messed up, right? Y'all do realize that if gun rights disappear in Canada, that it's more likely it's going to happen here, right? Let me ask you this. I mean, because we don't live in a bad neighborhood, but we live in a neighborhood, like a questionable neighborhood from time to time. If somebody breaks into our house while we're here, do I really have time to sit around and wait for the police like a helpless little punk? Probably not. You know, I've got a wife and soon to be a baby to protect. Not only that, I got 2 dogs. I don't want my dogs getting hurt because my dogs will try to protect me. If I've got something that can scare somebody away, at least, at minimum, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? But what if that's taken away and I've got no tools to defend myself? That's what really concerns me about what's happening with Canada. Justin Trudeau is taking a lot of power into his hands, and I'm worried about, you know, well, all right, well, maybe Justin Trudeau won't do anything evil, but what happens when somebody who would do something evil takes his place? And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't really think about. What happens when you've acquired all of this power for yourself, and then somebody from the opposite party all of a sudden has this power that you've accumulated for yourself? That's one thing I don't think a lot of people, especially I don't think a lot of Democrats, think about. What happens when you give all of this power to these social media companies and then all of a sudden a Republican wins? That's not at least a little bit concerning? That's why Republicans tend to not want to give power to the government. It's because we know that we don't want we don't want someone who doesn't have our values to take over that power. Canada's just diving straight into it. The whole thing with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, I shared enough of my thoughts about that, but it's very concerning to me how many. In our youth group, we have quite a few individuals who would consider them very left-leaning. Not a single one of them was on Amber Heard's side. Not a single one of them. You know, politically speaking, they'd be on the opposite end of me. But not a single one of our girls, or the guys, nobody in the youth group is pro Amber Heard. But here we've got these big news companies that want you to think that they are. That's concerning to me. That's concerning to me how much manipulation they think that they can have. And I'm glad that, you know, with this Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial and the social media fallout that happened because of it, it doesn't look like they've got as much control over the people as they think. But they have some. Whole thing with Roe versus Wade being tied into the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Be very careful anytime someone uses the phrase reproductive rights. Be very careful about that because most people have no idea what they're talking about when they say that. For most people, they're just using these little snippets. They're using these little clips of things that they've heard or clever sayings that they've heard in the past. But they don't really have anything to back up their belief systems. So be very cautious anytime you hear that. And whenever you do hear it, maybe challenge them on it. You know, don't be an a-hole about it, but like challenge them about it. Say, well, what do you mean by reproductive health? Get them to explain what they believe. Follow their logic. Don't just try to like throw things at them. That doesn't work because that puts you in as much of a hot seat as them. Ask them questions. Get them to explain why they believe what they believe. You know, well, why do you believe that that you should save the life of an unborn child. It's not born yet. It's not a life yet. Well, actually, I do believe that it's a life. I believe that it's a life crafted by God. You know, I have a belief in God. I believe He's the one that creates life. I believe that He's the one that gives purpose and meaning and value. And that people who've not committed right or wrong don't deserve to die. I firmly believe that. I don't see anywhere in the Bible where somebody seems to die because of someone else's sin. And there's actually a part of the Bible, and I need to do some deeper dive into this to make sure that I've got a full response. But there's a part of Deuteronomy where it says that no child is to be punished for the sins of the father, and I find that really, really interesting. But yeah, I don't believe that we should end a life because of something they have not done. Well, what about the mother's career? What about it? You wouldn't want to kill her because she didn't get her job, would you? You wouldn't want somebody to end their life because they suddenly lost their job and they're unemployed, right? We're against suicide, aren't we? So if we're against suicide because of somebody losing a career, why are we pro ending a different life because of a career? It doesn't make sense to me. That's why you should be very careful whenever someone uses the phrase reproductive rights, because they usually don't have a step-by-step defense prepared for it, and they usually don't really know what they believe. They just have a few feelings about a few strong things they believe, and they've not really followed that to its logical progression. So let's work on trying to get someone to follow a logical progression. I could go on about all the midterm stuff. I don't really want to, so I'm not going to. But the stuff with Alex Jones. The reason that I think it's so important that we talk about the Alex Jones stuff is because Alex Jones was wrong. He was, just point blank. I mean, he admits it. He's been admitting it for years that he was wrong when he said that it didn't happen. And I think that I do think that he is overstepping a little bit the truth about what he said. I didn't hear it myself, but, you know, watching Alex Jones on some other stuff, it wouldn't shock me if he's actually a little bit. Let me pull up that article. It wouldn't shock me if he was a little bit more bold than he makes it appear. Now, he says that they put together every single moment that he said anything about it. Who cares if he has 1 billion? That's not really what the news is. And you see here, it's not clear if the judgment would have a chilling effect on others who broadcast false and defamatory statements, said Thomas Hentoff, a Washington-based First Amendment attorney who has represented major media companies. It can take years or even decades to collect judgments, Hentoff said, because Jones's cases were outliers because he had default judgments against him, meaning he never staged a merits defense. There are a lot of people, here's another claim, there are a lot of people who make money by expressing extreme views, and I would not hesitate to think that a large jury's monetary judgment in itself would cause them to change course. Here's the problem, though. Alex Jones was wrong, and he's being punished incredibly severely. Even if it's the absolute even if you believe this is the absolute worst thing that anybody could ever do, Alex Jones was wrong. What happens now when you're wrong? Let's say what happens if you say something along these lines. Let's say that, you know, in a moment's time, you say something that's a little bit backwards, and somebody finds out about it, and they start writing pieces about you, like Amber Heard did, and they start making all of these statements about you. They contact your employer, and you lose your job because of these things you said. This is now the template for how they're going to go after people who spread misinformation. The scary thing is, it's not just about Alex Jones. It's about anybody now who goes against the narrative. For example, did you know that I think it was Kanye who said something about what's his name, George Floyd, and his death, and now the family's trying to sue him over it, saying that he's spreading false information. And I've been very cautious about Kanye the whole time. I've not been one that's been ready to jump on the Kanye bandwagon, but it concerns me a lot that someone can be right and still be silenced. It concerns me a lot that he can say something truthful, because I've gone over this. You can check my podcast, 1 out of 1 podcast. I did a video called, or not a video, an episode called Hands Up, Don't Speak Truth. And we went through 3 major Black Lives Matter cases where the truth was exact opposite of what Black Lives Matter said. Scary. That's really scary. But now that when Kanye got up, because he was talking about how the death didn't quite line up with what Black Lives Matter was saying, and now George Floyd's family suing him. You can now be sued for speaking the truth. That's a big deal. Not only can you be sued for being wrong, but you can also be sued for telling the truth. This is the line in the sand. The information. I believe, I forget who it was that said it, but it's one of the people I follow. I believe it's Andrew Klavan. That the big battle of our time is the fight for information. That's a fight where everything comes down to, and that's why I say that the biggest story of the year is the Twitter files. The Twitter files are the story of the year, because if you don't have access to information, or if you don't have access to all of the information, or if you're not allowed to share the information, then you don't live in a free society. You guys may, if you follow him, you may know this, you may not know this. But Louder with Crowder, they've been blocked multiple times by YouTube. They've been given multiple hard strikes for things that were verifiably true. One of those was about, I'd say, a year ago, I think. They were given a hard strike because one of the guys on the team, Gerald, quoted the CDC statistics on flu deaths, saying that we should be pushing more flu vaccinations because the flu is more deadly to children than COVID. And if you remember, during that time, there was this big scare about Kawasaki's disease, about how kids who got COVID would get Kawasaki's disease. Ended up, it was a super rare incident. It was not widespread at all. Kids are fine when they get COVID. It is very rare when there's major complications. Okay, we found that out, and now we can talk about it because it's not a consequence anymore. Like, these politicians are not going to get in trouble for it anymore. But this battle of information, if we're not allowed to speak the truth when we have the truth, just like, even though he's got his issues, Alex Jones talking about George Floyd's death. If you can't speak about truth, you don't live in a free society. You only live in a society that tolerates you until your belief is considered unpopular. And the reason why I think Twitter is the biggest story of the year, you've got Elizabeth Warren. Gotta love Elizabeth Warren. And by lover, I mean not. Elizabeth Warren will get up, and if you remember, she was being asked questions about Twitter, and she said, I believe that no one person should be able to decide the way that billions of people communicate. She had zero problems with it when the government, as we see in this article, was censoring people who were talking about COVID and the vaccine. Things that now are fine to say because the consequences are gone now. The control over the freedom of speech is the biggest battle that we have. And if we lose the battle for the freedom of speech, you lose your free country. Now, as Christians, I think we should constantly be preparing for the free world to disappear. Christians have lived as outlaws ever since Christianity started. They've been living as outlaws from governments who are trying to censor them and shut them down. And the funny thing is Christianity thrives when it's being silenced. So I think we should always be preparing for that. But if it happens, the world is going to get really dark. And I don't think that most people are ready for that. So that's why I think the Twitter files are the biggest story of the year. And that's why I think that we need to remember what's happening right now with the Twitter files for the years to come. Government's corrupt. We got a chance to fix it. Can't really fix it if you're forgetting what happened. All right, that's going to conclude our talk for the yearly major events of 2022. If there are any other major events, please leave them in the comments. And I might do a video if I find there's like something that I really, really missed. I might come back and go back through them. But for right now, I think that's going to be it. And I will see you guys soon, and we will do this again next year. Sound good? Sounds good.